are some of the cultural differences? I always had more fun. David was STC in New York when I was in LA, and I always had much more fun sort of trying to draw up the difference between the Americans and the Aussies. And there were quite stark differences, I think, that we all had a bit of fun with. They're not as stark with the UK, but there are a couple of differences that are worth noting. Decision making in particular, they are so slow. They decide by group, they decide by consensus, they have protocols, they have processes. It's just excruciating sometimes. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be extremely patient and understand the decision-making process. They do still have quite a lot of hierarchy. There are still titles, peerage issues, status, privilege. So if you're talking to a Sir Alan and you don't have someone of equivalent rank in your delegation with you, you may not actually get access and you may not be able to speak to them. So it may be worthwhile bringing someone along who is more of a peer just to facilitate that interaction. That is not true in sort of 45 and below anymore. But it is still very formal and same thing, dress conservatively and don't ask personal questions, be much more polite, don't swear, not that you would, but a lot of Aussies are more colourful in their language than the Brits are used to. Timelines, this is a classic split. The timelines on projects can move. So if you want to stick to a timeline, you need to make it very clear about the costs to the business as to why that timeline is important, or they will just keep moving you out because they want more time to make the decision. But heaven help you, if you are 2 minutes late for a meeting, you can kiss the deal goodbye. So watch punctuality. That is the height of rudeness to be late. If you're going to be even 2 minutes late, I would suggest you call in advance. But the beauty about dealing with the UK is actually they really want a win-win situation. Sometimes in the American culture, it was about making sure that the American side had the best deal possible. On the UK side, it's much more about trying to make sure that both sides really are getting a win-win situation, and that's really refreshing. They will try to make sure that everyone is happy. I've touched very lightly on the understated and indirect. Sometimes the Aussies are seen to be extraordinarily direct and will ask questions about the business, about their decision-making process, and they're a bit surprised about the sort of the broad, fluffy answers they get in return. It's because they don't want to actually say no, because they're not entirely sure whether the answer is no or is yes yet. So just be aware that you may have to go back several times to actually get clarity on whether or not they really do want a decision, or use us. Often we find that we can go in and we can save them face by asking the question and feeding it back to you. Issues-based selling, just very quickly on this, the power of collaborative learning. We're finding this particularly in the Olympics, anything to do with the Olympics. One of the fastest way for us to access decision makers is actually not to go to them and say, here's 30 companies that are brilliant on security to merchandising to whatever it is. Don't you want to talk to them? What we're finding is much more effective is going in and saying, are you guys thinking about London 2012 and some of the problems you might be having? And of course they'll say, yes, we are. And we'll say, well, what areas are those problems? And they'll say security, merchandising, etc. We'll say, would it be helpful if we brought together some Australians who've had to deal with some of those issues before, just to tell you what their learnings were? And they said, oh, that'd be really good. You get 6 people that we're going to be selling in there talking about their learnings, and no surprise, when the British decision makers leave the room, they're thinking already about writing the specifications along the lines of what they've just heard. So it's a very soft way to get the business outcome that suits their cultural mannerisms. Lastly, where do I go for help? Again, there is so much information out there. There are so many sources of help. We're wired, so please use it. I realise English language, I think in about 7 years ago, internet was largely 75% English language. It's about 25% now and falling, but there are still a lot of online resources there that you can use. The European Professional Women's Network I would recommend, likewise Business Link in London. But absolutely try and identify people in ACT and around who've done it before, because the stories from the trenches are going to be much more memorable than as much as I might like to think, listening to me, the trench stories are actually going to be much more enlightening. And of course, do ask us though, because we're very happy to try and help solve whatever the question might be, whether it's a logistics question or a strategy question. We're here to help. Thank you.